All
All right.
right. On. So, okay. So this isn't really like news, but I did want to just get a word in on the immigration
Oh
like
boy, he's
thing.
gonna go there,
Here we
folks.
go. This is my soapbox.
Perfect.
Um. So the church, we talked about a couple weeks ago. The church released some guidelines, which actually I could not find the very specific guidelines for bishops
Hmm.
on how to deal with immigrants, people who may or may not be here illegally, how to deal with those situations, what kind of aid to give them, and all that type of stuff. But this is just such an interesting and difficult topic theologically, and in the statement that the church released, they gave sort of three general, sort of like almost like um, um guidelines or talking points, or sort of like a vision for how they're
Hmm.
approaching the situation. And the first is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints obeys the law, and the second is we follow Jesus Christ by loving our neighbors. And
Hmm.
neighbor includes all of God's children. And then we seek to provide basic food and clothing as our capacity allows to those in need, regardless of their immigration status. But it's interesting that they left out housing of
Hmm.
that list, right? And I think that kind of goes into some of their guidelines. But the thing that kind of like a little bit like bothers me with this statement is that it's I've always found the church's adherence to like the laws of the land as very kind of like interesting, and kind of coming out of our articles of faith, which were
Hmm.
very inspired by a specific point in history and what the church was going through,
Hmm.
you know, with in that period of time. And I feel like, around the world, there's so many people who are living under, let's just be honest, evil and oppressive governments, that
Hmm.
this idea of like a church member obeys the law can only take you so far, right? And I think that a lot of people who would be pro sort of like, um, well, let's say anti deportation,
Hmm.
would say this is a time for civil disobedience, right? And so, one, I've always felt like the church is lacking a little bit in their discussion around civil disobedience. Like, I
Hmm.
do think that civil disobedience is, can like I can't think of like any scriptural examples of civil disobedience, but I'm sure that there are.
Hmm.
I mean, I guess Moses, fleeing
Yeah.
from the Pharaoh is a example of civil disobedience, basically.
And there's a lot of, I would say, Joseph Smith, or early church
Oh yeah,
civil disobedience, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but then, so but the other thing I just wanted to comment on here is that, but I also think that people on the sort of anti-deportation side do shortchange people on the I don't know how you like, I guess on the right,
Hmm.
a little bit when they say that they're not being charitable or whatever, because you
Yeah.
should always love your neighbor. And the reason for that is I think that what people on the right are seeing, if you could sort of say it scripturally or
Hmm.
theologically, is render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's,
Yeah.
right? And unto God that which is God. And I think that the church can have sort of like a um a view of saying render unto Caesar, meaning obey the laws of the land. And that is something that Jesus Christ himself said. So you could see sort of an argument for that. And so the next question is, are our like immigration laws, are they unjust? Are they worthy of our civil disobedience?
Hmm.
Right. And if they are unjust, then you can say, okay, render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, but like in this case, Caesar is corrupt and unjust, and so we can disobey him,
Yeah.
right?
We're gonna tip some tables as Christ did, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's kind of where that's just like the part of this discussion that I haven't heard. I listened to the Mormon Land podcast about this topic, and I just kind of wanted to like bring it up because I'm very much like a middle of the road, middle ground type person. And I just
Yeah.
think that like both sides, there are two competing like theological sort of points of view here. And I think that, it would be good if, I don't know. I just want to talk about it, I guess.
So what you're saying is that you kind of feel like the church articulated more clearly, like where to draw the line, maybe because we're sort of talking these platitudes, right? As far as like, yeah, like love your neighbor and like follow the laws and okay, like good luck everyone, and we're like, well, wait a minute, like these are like we're on ground zero here, like we're really this is real life to some people, and I don't know how to apply what you're saying because this brother, and this is the really with several issues, right? The church will have a statement and it's a little unclear. And so one side of the aisle or the one side of the opinion are interprets it very appealing, like, well, obviously the church agrees with me, and then the other side is like, no, 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 well, obviously the church agrees with us, and so then we really burrow into our opinions, and it's like, no, this is I'm on God's side here because obviously the church stayed this right, and this is I think I mentioned this before, like back in the 70s or 60s and 70s where like Elder Ezra Taft Benson and Elder Hugh B. Brown would like get up in conference and really kind of give this provocative talk either about the Constitution or civil rights. And it was kind of created some tension, which I think was uncomfortable for the church as an institution, but also like at least you knew where they stood, right? At least you saw like the debate unfolding in a way that's like, oh, I see his point and his point, where now it's kind of this more general message coming from the church, right? And that's sort of that's where you're at with that tension of like, well, I
Yeah.
mean, give us more, like, tell us more, like, what does this actually look like?
Yeah, well, I will say that I actually think that the order that they put their 3 points in, should be reversed. I think it should be loving for others first and then obeying the law.
Hmm.
But I guess, yeah, my point is that I think that there are theological like justifications for like um both sides, and I
Yeah,
think people just need to be comfortable with like tension and
right.
paradox, because we run into that all the time in the gospel. But I will say this, even though I do think that, I think that um like expecting people to obey the law, I think is something that's important to recognize.
Hmm.
At the same time, I myself, because one of the questions that they were asking on the Mormon Line podcast was, should a member of the church report somebody to ICE? Would that be a charitable thing to do?
Hmm.
And I don't, or not a charitable thing. Would that be like a Christ-like thing to do? Right. And I, I will say this, like, I don't think I could do it, you know,
Yeah.
like, so there's, if even for me, I'm like, I think that the deportations to some extent are justified because I think people should obey the law and we need to hold
Hmm.
people accountable. But at the same time, I don't think I could find it in my heart to like report someone who's illegal.
Yeah. So, well, going back to as far as the order of those points, I think generally as an institution, the church is more afraid of the government than they are maybe culture or the people.
Right.
So it's like, let's be clear, like, hey, just so you know, we're starting with the law. Like, we want to do the law. Um, I did listen to that Mormon Land podcast as well. It was a while ago. I don't remember all the details, but I guess it's the framing. That's what kind of drives me crazy with the Salt Lake Tribune and others, where the framing is completely off. Where, like, in my opinion, I mean, if you, I don't know, does ICE have a phone number? Like, can you really report people? And in my opinion, especially right now, if you called ICE or sent an email or reported someone, they'd be like, we're busy here. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
so what? Your good neighbor who, yeah, happens to not have any, legalization of being here. Like, we're not going to then like. It's not like they're waiting around for that phone call to jump in the trunk and go get them, right? Yeah, I'm
Right.
also seeing this with, the Trump administration. I think removed like the ICE uh, can go into a church and what's the other one like? Oh, a school, right?
Yeah.
And detain somebody. And now people like the problem is then like people like the Salt Lake Tribune and others, they take that framing to the extreme measure of like ICE is like kicking down doors in church and walking into a sacrament meeting and dragging, the dad out to detain him. And I'm like, okay, like, first of all, that's just not happening. And I don't think, but if there is I think from the Trump administration and that side of things, why they put that in place is like, if you have an obvious rapist in the sacrament meeting or in the cathedral or whatever, and he's hiding out there knowing that they can't get him there,
Hmm.
yeah, go into the church and get the guy and get him out of there. Like, to me, they're more focused on those really the terrible, violent criminals and things. And so, but then when we create this framing of like, isn't it terrible that the government can do that? Wait, the government's not doing that right now. I'll
Yeah.
stand corrected if you send me a story or give me an example. And so, to me, the framing is just off, right? To me, it's like, well, yeah, I would, and I served my mission in Sacramento. I was a Spanish speaking elder. Like, that's all. That's all I baptized were undocumented immigrants, right? Like, and many of those missionaries I served around. I think of Elder Carbajal, who was here. He did not have, he was not legal in the country. And that's why he got sent to Sacramento, because if you're in the country and go on a mission, they will send you within, they're not going to send you out of the country because then you can't get back in. Right. And so to me, I'm fine with that. And I'm not going to report anybody, but to me, it's like, even if I could, like, even if I had a dark soul and I just don't think ICE cares, and they're not going to like show up in 10 minutes and like throw the guy in a truck. I don't know. So I think we make more of it than what it is. But what thoughts come to mind? I mean, tell me where I'm off.
No, yeah. I mean, I think that as people often do, they probably are taking things to sort of like the moral like extremes to kind of like,
Hmm.
yeah, test the boundaries of like the current policy, you
Hmm.
know. And yeah, I would probably like, yeah, I think I agree with you at the very least that the Mormon Land podcast did not have make any effort to be balanced in their discussion, like
Well,
at
that's kind of their
all.
calling card, but yeah.
And again, yeah, it kind of goes back to what I was saying. It's like, at least I'm not even like putting down like a stake on one side or the other. I'm just saying, at least represent like what people like, both sides
Yeah.
of the issue,
Yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah, because I'm right there with you. Like, I don't, even if ICE did like show up 10 minutes later after you reported them, I'm not going to report anybody. I think that's where the church is at, right? The fact that even with our missionary program, when if a missionary applies, puts his paper in, to go on a mission, they're very intentional where they send him, because they don't want to get them into trouble, right? With that, where they live and all those things. So to me, and I think that's where most, especially Latter Day Saints, are at. And even someone who maybe leans more right, like, I'm like, yeah, I'm not looking to being like, oh, I know that guy, like, go get him and go get him. Now the criminals, like, if there's a criminal in my church and he's not leaving because he knows the ICE can't come in there, I'll be the first one to drag him out and say, here he is, right? Because
Yeah.
who's done maybe a violent crime or a rape or something. Um, but to me, more, we're just like, just give us a system that works, right? Like, we can't
Yeah.
have open borders. I mean, in a perfect world, even in the celestial kingdom, we don't have open borders, right? Like, there's boundaries, and those are healthy boundaries. Just give us a system. And I think where people on the more conservative side feel burned is back when Ronald Reagan, he did whatever you call it, comprehensive immigration reform, and just said, all right, we're starting over, but they never closed the border. And so then we're back, and we have the same problem that Reagan tried to fix. So we're just like, that's where and I think that's where the church is dancing, is like, hey, let's not put these people, like, give them free rent in our home, because that is against the law. Of course, we're not going to like call anybody, ICE on anybody as if they care. And so that's, I think the church is navigating there. But I think in all of our lives, we start with the third principle, like, right, like, we just want to love you and glad you're here and all that. Anyways, I'm freezing.
That's something that I'm missing from the left, is like, what is their sort of like larger sort of like hope? I know that they want illegal immigrants to stay, I guess. But then, so it's like, yeah, do they want open borders? And that's probably a pretty easy question for
Yeah.
somebody for me to ask. And so I
Well,
have
that's
to
right. I look
make a
forward
note
to
of that.
Matt responding, because he usually has a contrary opinion to
Yeah,
mine, and which I love having Matt on, and
yeah,
so
totally.
hopefully
I
we'll
mean,
learn from him. But yeah, it seems
that's
like, but going back to like that, like the Salt Lake Tribune, it's like, we're not talking about whether we're turning people in or not. Like, that is so far outside the framing of what's really going on. You know what I
I
mean?
will
So
say this though. I will say
mhm.
this. One of the interviews on their podcast said that happened to her. That, at least, and I don't know how like real it was. Maybe the guy was just trying to scare her. But she had gone into a restaurant and somebody had said that they called ICE on her or something like that, and then she
Uh-huh.
left. And so whether or not like they would actually respond to a report like that, it is very sad to hear something
Yeah.
like that
Yeah, that would be
happen.
heartbreaking. And again,
Yeah.
now, but if we had the full story and then suddenly we realize, oh, this guy's actually has a criminal rap sheet, like he's done some
Uh,
terrible things, then I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, go into that restaurant and make it happen, right? But yeah,
right.
and again, I'm curious. Maybe I'll try and like, is there a phone number out there? Do I just call ICE and there's like some guy standing by,
Google
like,
it.
hey, where can we go pick up your illegal friend? You know, like I don't know. It just
Yeah.
it seems a bit overblown. But anything else? I think this is a fantastic discussion. I think you bring up really that tension that a lot of members of the church are wrestling with. So
Yeah, and I think that, and again, I'm always like hoping for the church to just give some direction, give some doctrinal direction. I don't like these short, like 3 paragraph press releases,
yeah,
like give us something more to work with here. But, hey, we're supposed to follow the spirit too.
yeah,
So I guess that's what they're expecting us to do. So
yeah.